Hey everyone, welcome back to another video on the Wreath network on TryHackMe. Today we're going to be taking a look at Task 25, Command and Control Empire Listeners. Listeners in Empire are used to receive connections from stagers, which we'll look at in the next task. The default listener is the HTTP listener. This is what we'll be using here, although there are many others available. It's worth noting that a single listener can be used more than once. They do not die after their first usage, so you can just have a listener that continues to listen for additional agents connecting back, or additional stagers connecting back to form agents. Let's start by setting up a listener in the Empire CLI. I'm just going to walk through this briefly for the sake of the room. I'm going to just talk about it, but we're actually going to do it all in Starkiller, and that's how I do recommend doing this, just because most people use Starkiller for Empire nowadays, unless they're working in a very low resource environment. Before going any further, it's worth mentioning that the syntax for the command in Empire can be obtained with the help space command option. To select a listener, we would use the use listener command. To see all available listeners, type use listener, making sure to include a space at the end, and then press tab twice. When you've picked a listener, type use listener and then the name of the listener you want to use. So in this case, we're going to be using HTTP. And you can see an example down here. So use listener, tapping tab twice after you have a space at the end will show you all those options. And then you can use listener HTTP, and there you go. Now that we have a listener selected, use the command info to see all available options. So we can do info, and we can see the basic options that we have. So we have the name, authors, description, and then the actual options below. The syntax for setting options is identical to the Metasploit module options syntax. So we do set, the name of the option, and then the value we want to set it to. So set, name, and the web server, and then we can see the info that we've changed the name to be web server. Setting the name for the listener allows us to easily identify it later, especially if we have server open. It is best practice to set the name because it's going to make your life a lot easier, and it's, again, a documentation thing. Do it before you need it. It is not essential, however, and it can be left at the default HTTP if preferred. That said, some options must be set. At the bare minimum, we must set the host and the port. This is going to be what it's calling back to. So in this case, we can see the host is 1050.73.2. This would be the attacking machine, and then the port that it's going to be listening at. And if we run info, we can see that those have changed down here. Bear in mind that option names are case sensitive in Empire. Many of the other options presented here are extremely useful, so it's well worth learning what they do and how they can be applied. So this is something that's going to be more covered in the Empire room. I do recommend checking that out, as it's going to give you a better overview of the entire Empire itself. However, we're going to go ahead and truck on. With the required options set, we can start a listener with execute. So again, similar to Metasploit in this way. And you can see that it started a listener, and it's just waiting for connections. We can now use back to exit the main, or to exit back to the main Empire menu. To view our active listeners, we can type listeners and then press enter. And we can see that we have the web server listener here. Nice and easy. Once again, we can use the back command to exit to the main menu. When we want to stop a listener, we can use kill and then the listener name to do so. So we do kill web server if we wanted to kill that. We have a listener in the Empire CLI. Let's do the same thing in Starkiller. When we first launched Starkiller, we were placed automatically in the listeners menu. It's going to be this first one with the headphones up there. Let me scroll down. The process of creating a listener with the GUI is very intuitive. Click the Create Listener button, and we can do that up here. In the menu that pops up, set the type to HTTP. So we have the type up here. We're going to set it to HTTP, and I'm going to name it web server to make things much easier for me. And then type HTTP, the same, set the type to HTTP, the same as the Empire listener we created before. Several new options will appear. And we'll scroll down. Notice that these options are identical to those we saw in the command line interface version that we just did. Once again, set the name, host, and port. We'll name this, we can just name it web server in this case, since we aren't specifying that we are doing with a web server listener and then a listener on the CLI version as well. So if you want, if you still want command line access to Empire, you can run it with the --rest rather than headless. Headless specifies that you don't need the command line interface at that point, and then we just backgrounded it. However, again, most of this can be just done in Starkiller, and it's just fine. So we'll go ahead and set that, and then we need our host. So we're specifying that we are connecting back to 10. Let's see. Let's pull up Starkiller again, and I have my IP written down here. This is going to be your attacking host and the IP that you have on the TryHackMe Wreath network. And then our port is going to be 9000. With the option set, scroll back or scroll to the bottom of the page and click Submit, which we can see all the way down here. Back on the main listeners page, you will see your created listener. So we can click up here and we can see that it is running. Note, if you have a listener set up in Empire, this may also show up here. Start a listener in Empire and or Starkiller. We'll mark that as completed, and in the next video, we'll go over task 26, Empire Stagers, but until then, happy hacking!